Welcome to The Knowledge. The Knowledge, a Levitt Group podcast. Advanced knowledge for senior marketers. The Knowledge is a podcast of the Levitt Group, the sector interest group for senior marketers within the Chartered Institute of Marketing. To find out more about us, visit our website at www.levittgroup.org.uk or read the show notes for this podcast. Welcome to episode 14 of The Knowledge. I'm your host, Peter Domican, and today I'm talking to Campbell MacPherson about his book, The Change Catalyst: Secrets to Successful and Sustainable Business Change, published by Wiley, which is also the Business Book of the Year. Campbell, welcome to the podcast. Could you introduce yourself and tell us something about your background?
My name is Campbell MacPherson. I am a business advisor and an author, and I advise companies on leading change throughout the world via my consultancy, which is Change and Strategy International Limited. The book that has just been published by Wiley is The Change Catalyst, and I'm thrilled that it won the 2018 Business Book of the Year, which is fabulous. My background is for 25 years, I've been helping CEOs and leadership teams to lead and instigate sustainable change. And that's either as an in-house change lead, as a marketing director, as a strategy director, as an HR director, or as a consultant. So I moved to England in '99 from Sydney, where I was working for Anderson Consulting in the change division in Sydney. So I've done thousands of different jobs, but really work for CEOs and leadership teams, helping them to clarify their strategy and instigate successful change.
And how did you come to write the book?
Well, I was on a 3-year contract advising the investment committee of the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which is the world's second largest sovereign wealth fund. So I was in Abu Dhabi for 3 years. And in the last year, there was a very, very long Ramadan period that happened to butt right up against the even longer summer period. So I thought, right, there's a lot of hours in these 4 or 5 months. What am I going to do to fill it? And it was the last year of the 3-year contract. So I thought by the end of my contract, what I want to do is to have a book on change leadership that I can use to kickstart my consultancy again, which I needed to put on hold for 3 years to work with audio. So I literally sat down for about 30 hours a week before and after and during work and wrote the book.
So moving on to the topic of change, it's almost inevitable that someone in marketing or any other kind of function is going to be involved in a major change initiative at some point, either as a leader in charge of the change or as a team member. But the success rate of initiatives isn't great, is it?
No, and that was the trigger that I found for the book. There was a wonderful survey from Bain & Co. that was done in early 2016 that showed that 88% of change initiatives fail to deliver the outcomes they set out to achieve. So 7 out of 8 change initiatives fundamentally fail. And of course, it's about the same percentage of business strategies fail to deliver the outcomes they set out to achieve. Same thing with mergers and acquisitions. So when I saw that survey, I thought, fabulous, I've got the hook for the book. So I did a presentation in Abu Dhabi about why change fails and then turned it around to be, this is what we need to be able to focus on to succeed. And then worked out that they were the first 2 chapters of the book and got writing.
So let's distinguish personal change from business change. If the world is constantly changing and we're told to be more flexible, why are people so resistant to change?
Wow, that's a really good question. The biggest reason, the first reason that I talk about in the book about why change fails is that we humans just don't like change. And I've identified a few areas where that comes to fruition, where it comes to the surface. Firstly, and I think the biggest reason in the world of business is that we have a personal fear of failure, but more importantly than that, we fear the consequences of the failure. So we set out to achieve something, whether it's a project, whether it's a strategy, whatever it happens to be, and we're worried about failing, but we're more worried about what will happen to us if we do fail, and that's a cultural issue. We also have a fear of the unknown. I think we humans are very tribal. You can see that in business all the time. When you take someone out of one team and put them into another, I guarantee within 48 hours they're throwing rocks at their previous team. You know, we're a tribal species, so we have a fear of the unknown. We fear what that team is doing, and we're very quick to actually build tribes in the organization. And as change leaders, what we really need to do is to break down those tribes. There's only one tribe, and that's the entire organization. I see it all the time with my clients, in that a very strong leader of a department will somehow build an us versus them virtual walls around their department, rather than be inclusive and build the walls, if you like, around the business. Yeah, another reason that why people don't like change is fear of blame. And I saw this quite a bit in Abu Dhabi, is that people who had been responsible for an area or a process or a department who hadn't changed, as soon as you get someone coming in who they asked to come in to say, well, where can we change, where can we improve, and to point out a couple of areas where we could change, then whoever's responsible for doing things the way they're doing things at the moment feel that they're going to be blamed for not changing earlier, which is fascinating. Another one is the comfort of victimhood. I find that when big change is done to you, it's very, very easy for us to slip into being to the insidious role of being a victim. And we find that we believe we're powerless. We start to blame everybody else for the position we're in. But worse, we think that we are powerless to do anything about it. And during the workshops that I deliver for leadership teams and for employees, the key point about these workshops is that change is personal and no one is powerless, even when big change is done to you, because you have the power to at least work out how you're going to react to that change, and also to work out what you can now do once your head and your heart accepts that this change has actually happened.
Is that general, or is it down to specific personality types?
It's general. It's everyone goes through. You've probably seen the Kubler-Ross change curve from back in the 70s that I talk about in the book and run through in the workshops. It's everyone follows that change curve. It's an automatic, natural sequence of events that we go through. We start off with feeling shock when big change is done to us. And then we get into denial, and we move into fear, and we eventually get into some sort of a mild or more serious form of depression at the bottom of the trough, before our head then finally accepts what we're doing, then our heart accepts what we're doing, and then we can actually move on. So I think it's quite universal. Some personalities will move quicker through that change curve, and some personalities will get stuck on denial or fear or anger. But as change leaders, it's the one thing that we need to do is to have empathy and understand everyone's going through this change curve, particularly if they haven't instigated the change themselves. Actually, an interesting thing that I've worked out recently is that even when you instigate big change, or even when the change is good, you still go through a milder version, a slightly different version of that change curve. You might start with excitement, but you then start to get into a little bit of fear, a little bit of apprehension, before either buyer's or seller's remorse kicks in, and then you can move up the change curve. But even when big changes and you instigate yourself, or it's good change, it's still tough. Change is tough, and that's one of the reasons why 7 out of 8 change initiatives fail.
And it's continuous these days in the way that businesses are evolving.
Yeah, really good point. Really good point. Change has got to become a normal way of working. All change is personal, but leaders have to be able to understand that and build a culture where change is normal. It's not the April cull, as one of the organizations I was working for years ago. One of the people said, oh, it's April, we must all be having a reorganization and 10% of us will lose the jobs again, which I thought, goodness me, there's an interesting culture. It's just a continual way of changing. Change has got to be continual, because otherwise complacency sets in, and the most successful organizations can become the most complacent, and the most resistant to change. Have a look at Kodak, have a look at Blockbuster, have a look at several of the banks. Complacency can kill.
And that's particularly important when you've got threats to the business model.
I agree. No, I do agree. But it's being able to see those threats to your business model that is the challenge. It's if you're number 2 or number 3 in the market, you can see the threat to the market dominator's business model because you're the one threatening it. Or if you're starting up a Purple Bricks real estate agency or Innocent Juices, you're the disruptor, and you can see where the major players have left a gap in the market. When you're the major player, it's very, very hard to see the disruptors or to even believe that they are credible. So it's hard to change when you're a major organization. And actually, that's one of the other reasons why change fails. I call it inertia, and there are 3 types of inertia. One is initial inertia. Once you've finished planning, it's actually moving to action can be tough. The second one is midterm inertia, and we've all seen this. Anyone that has had to endure a large IT program has seen this, where the change program gets such a head of steam, like a locomotive hurtling down the track, and once the momentum starts, it's politically impossible to stop it. That's another reason. And the third one, as I talked about, is third type of inertia is complacency, that the successful companies end up falling to.
Personally, I'd add boredom to that, where things start off very well, but over time things run out of steam.
And one of the big reasons for that is a lack of a couple of things: a lack of clarity about what we're trying to achieve and why, and secondly, an obsession over the process over outcomes. I've seen so many change initiatives where the processes are perfect. I use this phrase that in my presentations that says the operation was a complete success. Unfortunately, the patient died. Yeah, and that's how I see so many projects and programs run. The process is perfect, but we all lose sight of the outcomes we're originally setting out to achieve, and actually lose sight of whether those outcomes, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the track, are still valid, and we don't stop and check.
And that's one of the problems, that if you've got a change program that's going on for a couple of years, as you move further along, then some of those original elements could be wrong. Yeah,
I agree.
You've got resources committed.
Well, it's not just resources committed. You've got the political capital. The longer a change program goes on, the more difficult it is for anyone to stand up, put their head above the parapet and say, "Are you sure that this is this is heading in the right direction? Are the outcomes still valid?" So what I recommend is that organizations build in a pause for reflection, or points to pause for reflection at every single step of any sort of change program, no matter how small or large it might be. And that sounds really obvious, but if you acknowledge that this is a phenomenon that every large change program will go through, is if you build in these pauses for reflection, at least it takes the political risk away from putting your hand up and saying, are we sure we're still wanting to deliver this?
It gives everyone a chance to recommit to the project, because obviously you may have people who were uncertain at the start, and then as time goes on and some things go wrong, they could potentially start to undermine the project.
And I agree with you entirely. And actually, more often than not, they're not undermining it. They're actually standing back and reflecting and saying, "Really? Are we sure about this?" But politically, they become the not disruptors. They become the saboteurs, or they're looked at as saboteurs, and they're not actually. They're helping the business save money and ask the right questions 9 times out of 10.
So what can people do to think about change and make change more beneficial to themselves?
Well, that's a double-headed question. Let me first take it from where this book is focused, which is from the leadership's perspective. So this book, The Change Catalyst, is all about leading change, really. It's how leaders can build a culture that embraces change and then lead the successful instigation of sustainable change or a new business strategy. So let's just look at it from the leader's perspective first, and then maybe come back to the personal aspects of change second. So from the leader's perspective, the biggest trait a leader needs to develop in instigating successful change is empathy. Actually understanding that without their people, the change won't be delivered. Only their people can deliver the change that the business actually requires, or the business strategy that requires. So the leaders need their people to deliver. And one of the key things, not one of the key things, the key things that leaders need to be able to do is firstly be clear about what they're trying to achieve and why. But they also need to understand the implications of the change. And it's not just a cerebral understanding where the leaders get together and the leadership team or the exec team and have a list of the implications and then crack on. They need to engage their people in deeply understanding the implications of this change, or as I like to say, what could possibly go wrong. And I did this with a large financial services firm. I got all of the 60 senior managers together. The CEO presented his vision for the future, and then I stood up and said, now, what could possibly go wrong with that? And there was great laughter, and we spent 2 hours listing every single thing and then prioritizing every single thing that could go wrong. And the CEO was very, very nervous about this. It worked out to be one of the best things that we could possibly have done, because once everyone vented their spleen and had the opportunity to point out all of the challenges, we then set about prioritizing, working out which ones were real challenges, which ones were not, and working out what we need to do to implement them. So by the end of the day, not only was everyone on board with the actual strategy or the direction, but they'd all worked out what they need to do to overcome the challenges as well. So it was probably the best day of workshops that I've been involved with.
What do you see as the main generic challenges that come out of that?
People are actually, what they won't voice, but what they're really wanting to know is, so what's in it for me? Is my job safe? Is number one. Secondly, where will I fit into the new organization or the new strategy? And thirdly, how can I gain from it? How will this benefit from me? Then fourthly, they might say, and what about my team? But that tends to be the voices inside their head. But one of the things that I also tell the leaders they need to do is they need to remember that emotions trump logic every single time. There's a great survey from the Corporate Leadership Council back in 2004 of 50,000 employees worldwide that took part in this survey. And they established that emotional commitment was 4 times more powerful than rational commitment. So if you just tell someone, this is the direction we're going towards, we're going to grow the business, we're going to double turnover and triple profit and increase staff numbers, that's all fine. But to get people, and people can understand it logically, but to emotionally engage with it, they need to understand what's in it for me, and they need their emotions appealed to. So if you can understand and find people's emotional triggers for any particular change, then you will have 4 times a strong commitment, and you've got a chance of success.
You mentioned earlier that people move along the acceptance curve at different rates, but what's the point at which you think that you've got commitment to change in terms of consensus? That's a really good question. It's obviously different for each different company depending on the culture, and it requires engaging not just the leadership, but finding what used to be called back in change management days, the change agents, throughout the organization, the people with the influence. So once you identify the people in the organization that have great influence and that people will naturally follow, and that's not hierarchical influence, it's normally social and personal influence. It's very important that they
become part of the planning process as well as the implementation process.
We touched earlier on the personal perspective for change. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Certainly. Well, to me, all change is personal. I think any large organizational change is actually the culmination of a host of individual personal changes. And as I talked about before, I think the fact that emotions trump logic every time. And the second thing is that leaders need empathy, need to understand that they need to find the emotional triggers of each of their change agents, but also each of their people. So the CEO needs to find the emotional triggers of his leadership team. He and the leadership team need to find the emotional triggers of every single one of the level below. The level below needs to do the same thing with their teams. And as an organization, they need to find those key people in the organization that need to be engaged emotionally with this, because it's all about personal change and overcoming people's natural fears to change. And how I talk to CEOs about this is I go through the change curve with them, and you can see even those that have heard about it and may have seen it before 10, 20, 30 years ago, they still get some insight on going back through this change curve. And when I get to anger, I said, so when people are angry about big change that is done to them, they start with denial, thinking you're going to wake up and change your mind. When you don't, they get angry. That anger, just realize that that's part of a normal human reaction to big change that is done to you. You get angry. You might get angry at a person. You might get angry at a company. You might just get angry at the damn universe. But you are angry. Don't take that personally, I say to the leaders. They said, just realize that's what people are going through. I mean, obviously, if they start throwing chairs around, that's a different kettle of fish. But understand the anger will pass. But you have to need to have empathy that they are going through hard times, because that's just normal when change happens to you.
And that obviously has an effect on the change leaders. What are the personal qualities of a change leader other than empathy?
Well, it's clarity of what they're trying to achieve and why. It's clarity, it's empathy, and to me, it's outcomes. It's a focus on outcomes. Empathy is more than just understanding. When it also requires genuine engagement and genuine communication. So the ability to listen is another point about empathy. So leaders need to be very clear about what they're trying to achieve, and possibly, as importantly, they need to be clear about why we're heading in a particular direction, because people don't change just because you tell them to. Not only do you need to find their emotional triggers, but you need them to understand why. You need to explain why this change is necessary, why this change is good, why this change is the thing that we all have to get behind. And once you uncover that, I think that's an important part of any sort of leader to be doing. But the other part, I sort of talk about, it's really the title of the book. I talk about what's key is a change catalyst to drive delivery. Now, in the book, I describe it as a separate role in any large organization change program. But actually, the qualities of what I call a change catalyst are really important for any leader and any change leader. And if a CEO isn't leading change, they're not really leading anything. So it's an important quality in a CEO, and that is to be outcomes focused, to be high EQ, which is where the empathy comes in, but also to be able to understand what the leaders want to be doing, what the CEO wants to be doing, what the board needs to be doing, and to understand the needs and wants of everyone at different levels throughout the organization. But the key point behind a change catalyst is that it's outcomes oriented. A lot of program managers, a lot of project managers, which you need, are process oriented. They're very IQ, they're very process oriented, and you need process, you need structure. But you also need someone, whether it's the CEO, whether it's a new role that you could call a change catalyst, to be focusing on the outcomes and to be the trusted confidant between the CEO, the leadership team, and the employees.
Moving along to another aspect of change programs, a lot of change initiatives are driven by strategy. What's a good strategy from a change perspective?
To me, there are four main components of any good strategy. Firstly is the analysis. It needs to be based on an analysis of the market, on analysis of customers, and what their needs, their wants, and their aspirations are. And that sounds fairly obvious, but a lot of companies dive straight into some form of a strategic direction or a vision or a mission without actually doing the analysis phase in great detail. And that analysis obviously needs to be external and also needs to be internal. What is the magic that you want to keep after this change is implemented? And that could be after a new business strategy or after an organization redesign. What is the magic that you want to keep? So what are your comparative advantages, but what are the key things that you need to hold on to? The second part is the strategic direction. This is where you get vision, mission, purpose, that sort of thing. I recommend to CEOs that they adopt a vision if they are a vision-based company. So a vision is a view of the future that some organizations feel is a bit fluffy, and others feel, yes, that's a wonderful North Star. That's what we are trying to seek to achieve, the type of company we want to become. Our mission, on the other hand, is more action-oriented. It's more, this is what we need to achieve in the next 5 or 10 years. There are numbers attached, and it's more action-oriented. And visions are great. Visions are for dreamers, and there's nothing wrong with dreamers. Some companies love visions, and their people really get behind a good vision. But what I do love, whether you're a vision company or a mission company, is a purpose, stating why are we here? Why does this company exist? And it's not just to make money or to shareholder value. They're givens, or to obey the regulator. They're just givens. It's actually, why are we here? What is it we're going to do for our customers that is the reason why we all get out of bed in the morning? So strategic direction, which obviously you need a purpose, you need an aspiration, a vision or mission, whatever suits you. You need why are we doing this, the strategic rationale, and you need the corporate goals you're trying to achieve. The third part of any good strategy is a proper go-to-market strategy, where you get into the details of the target customers, the core propositions, the key differentiators of each particular proposition, and of course the financials. And then fourth, and perhaps most importantly, is a strategy execution plan. I found this wonderful saying 15 years ago now, that I think it was a Chinese saying. I don't know what the provenance of it is, but it's strategy without implementation is a daydream, and implementation without strategy is a nightmare. So you've got to have strategy execution plan. I mean, 90% of strategies fail to implement because they don't have a good plan.
My own personal experience is that that's a stage that often gets neglected, and there's very little reiteration of the strategy against the plan, so that if something comes up in the planning, it just tends to get swept under the carpet, so to speak.
Yes, on my list of 10 reasons why change or big strategies fail is that leadership doesn't stay the course. And that's exactly what you're talking about. So you've got through the difficult, detailed analysis phase. I've just been doing that with a client at the moment, and it's taken a good 3-4 months to really understand the analysis and the implications of it. Then into the strategic direction phase, then into the go-to-market strategy. Then by that stage, frankly, the CEO and the leadership team, their attention is beginning to divert elsewhere, and then they give it to the program office to execute, or someone to execute, and that's the point where the momentum starts to wane. So I agree with you entirely. Everyone needs to stay focused, but also you need to everything you've learned during the analysis phase and the strategic direction phase and the go-to-market phase needs to be reiterated and kept current right throughout the execution phase. Because without execution, it's just been a lot of hot air and interesting PowerPoints.
One of the things that major change programs try to do is to change the culture of an organisation. I wonder if you could say something about that.
A senior executive once said to me, gosh, this might probably about 15 to 20 years ago. She said, Campbell, there's no point trying to change culture. It's just something that happens. You've got no control over it whatsoever. It's just something that happens. And at the point, I didn't know enough, or I wasn't senior enough, or maybe confident enough to point out that she was talking utter rubbish. It's a culture actually is an organization's culture is is whatever the leadership creates. In fact, I think an organization gets the culture that its leadership deserves. It's entirely created by the leadership. It's created by the leadership's behaviors. It's created by the incentives that the organization puts together. It's created by the strategy, by the clarity or lack of it. It's created by how well the leadership actually listens to employees. I was working for an organization a few years ago who every year did their wonderful culture survey, and it was an extremely good survey. But if they didn't like the answers to the questions, they didn't publish the questions. They didn't publish the answers to the questions. So when I was actually there, they didn't bother to publish 20% of the questions that they'd asked all the staff because the CEO and the HR director didn't like the answers.
You'd have thought someone might have noticed.
Well, interestingly, that little duck that noticed was me. Everyone else really had given up on the survey anyway. So, and they didn't even notice. When I pointed out that actually you'd only seeing 80% of the answers, everyone went, no, that can't possibly be the case. And then when I showed the questions and then showed the answers, because I was the only one taking notes, everyone went, oh, hang on, that's a little bit ridiculous. Anyway, so the question about culture change is, if you treat culture change like a program, which is almost me sounding like a program manager rather than a change catalyst, if you treat it like a program and give it the discipline and analysis and thought that a change program inevitably has, then you've got a chance on changing your culture from what it is today to what it is you need it to be. And let's be honest, culture is just behaviors. You can't measure culture, but you can measure or at least observe behaviors. And it's how the leadership behave, and it's how everybody behaves while they're delivering, or how they deliver the strategy that they're setting out to deliver. One of the best definitions of culture and the worst definitions of culture that I've ever heard is the same thing. It is culture is what happens, is how people, sorry, let me start again. Culture is how people behave when they think no one is watching. I thought, that is beautiful. That is perfect. Then I saw who said it, and it was Bob Diamond a couple of weeks before he had to step down as CEO because of the Barclays libel fixing scandal. And then that put a completely different complexity on it.
One of the things that's frequently done in terms of culture change is coming up with a new set of corporate values. I wonder if you could say something on that.
Yeah, I've got a whole chapter in the book on that. In fact, and I call it value schmalues, which is a little bit tongue in cheek. Really important, but they have to be genuine. And actually, I had an epiphany while writing this chapter, and it was that there are really three types of values in any organization, and no organization I know has actually overtly looked at it through these three lenses. So let me just talk you through each one. The first one will come as no surprise to your members and to your listeners, and that is that the brand values are what your customers say they are. Now, that's really obvious to marketeers and strategy people like us. But let's just repeat that. Brand values are not what your CEO or leadership says they are. It's what your customers say they actually are. So there's the brand values. The next one is your corporate values. Now, they're not what you put in your annual report 9 times out of 10. Your corporate values are actually what your employees say they are. The third type of values, and these are the values that you do put in your annual report, that CEOs and leadership teams hang from the ceilings to greet people as they alight from the lifts every morning. They're what I call your aspirational values. So when you open an annual report and see see customer centricity and integrity and whatever the values are, they're what you're aspiring to achieve. Now, if organizations could look at their values through those three lenses, then I think they would see the gaps between reality and aspiration, and they'd be able to build a culture that is genuine, that everyone looks at and go, yeah, that's actually where we are today, and this is where we need to be, and it would actually build a culture that is enabled to deliver the strategy. So that was the epiphany I had during value schmalues.
We're coming up to the end of the podcast now, and I'm just wondering, if someone is going to be involved in a change program, not necessarily as a leader, what 3 pieces of advice could you give them?
Firstly is to ensure that you have a clarity on what the change program is trying to achieve, precisely what it's trying to achieve and why. And I would question the change leadership to make sure that you are really clear on those points, because not only will it help you, but it will also help the leaders of the change as well. The other thing I would do is to make sure that the implications of this change to customers, to employees, to processes, to organization, to the organization as a whole, the implications are really well thought through, because if some implications are so significant that the actual strategy, that the outcomes it's trying to achieve could actually change as a result. And thirdly is empathy, as I talked about before, is to understand that in order to be successful, you and the change leadership need to understand what it is that people fear about the change and how to actually find the emotional triggers of the key people in the organization that you need to help you deliver the change. Because spreadsheets and org charts and flow charts and diagrams don't change organizations. People do.
It's a huge subject, Campbell. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast. How can people get hold of you and find out more?
Certainly. Well, no, thank you, Peter. I really enjoyed it. The website is changeandstrategy.com, and you can just send me an email at campbell@changeandstrategy.com or have a look on the website, and be more than happy to help or point people in the right direction.
Campbell, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That was Campbell MacPherson, and we were talking about his book, The Change Catalyst: Secrets to Successful and Sustainable Business Change, which is published by Wiley. The book's available in all the usual places, but if you use the code in the show notes, there's an additional 10% off at the CIM bookstore. Just follow the links in the show notes. That's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, goodbye.